Get ready, folks, because today we're diving deep into the ancient world. It's going to be a wild ride.
Oh, yeah. It's a story that has fascinated people for centuries, and the source material for today's deep dive is in Arabic.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So we'll be relying on your expertise to translate and guide us through it all.
Absolutely. I'm happy to help. And trust me, it's a story full of twists and turns.
I bet. So who are we uncovering today?
We're going to be uncovering the story of a goddess named Ashtaroth.
Ashtaroth. Okay. I'm already intrigued. What's so special about her?
Well, for starters, she's a figure who appears across multiple cultures, and her story highlights the power of symbols, rituals, and how ancient beliefs can persist through time.
That sounds right up our alley.
Yeah.
We love exploring those connections.
And you might be shocked to learn how Ashtaroth's symbols have topped up in history in places you wouldn't expect.
Ooh, even today. Okay, now I'm really hooked. Let's get into it. So where do we start?
Well, let's start with her many names. It's like she adapted to the beliefs of each culture she touched.
Like she was a chameleon of the divine world.
Exactly. For example, in Egypt, you have Isis linked to the sycamore tree.
Right, Isis, the mother goddess.
And in Babylonian culture, there's Ishtar associated with the willow tree.
I see. So they both had these tree connections.
And both share striking similarities with Ashtaroth. It's as if she represents a universal archetype.
So we're talking about a goddess with a lot of different faces, a lot of different interpretations.
Absolutely. And then you have the Phoenicians who worshipped her as Astarte.
Astarte? I've heard that name before.
It echoes throughout their territories. They even named cities after her, like Astaroth Karna.
Astaroth Karna. It's mentioned in the Bible, right?
That's right. It means Ashtaroth of the horns.
Ashtaroth of the horns. That sounds pretty intense. What was her connection to horns?
Well, it really points to her being associated with a horned deity, a central figure in their pantheon.
You mean the horned god?
Precisely. He was a prominent figure in Phoenician mythology.
Okay, so Ashtaroth of the horns. It's giving me some powerful goddess vibes. What else can you tell us about what the Phoenicians believed about her?
Well, she had this interesting duality. On one hand, she was considered a powerful goddess of war, helping them in battles.
It's like a fierce protector, a warrior goddess?
Exactly. But she was also a goddess of fertility who blessed their crops and harvests.
Oh, wow. So she was both a provider and a protector.
Precisely. And this duality is even reflected in some of the ancient carvings depicting her.
Oh, really? Like what?
There are images of her standing on a pile of human skulls, signifying her power over death.
Okay, that's pretty intense.
It's a stark reminder of how different ancient beliefs could be.
For sure. So we've got skulls, a horned god connection. What other symbols were associated with Ashtaroth?
The owl is a big one.
Oh yeah, owls. They always have that air of mystery.
She's also often depicted with the crescent moon and the morning star, which is Venus.
Those are potent symbols. The crescent moon, Venus. They all have such strong mystical connotations.
And there's one more key symbol, the dove.
The dove. That seems a bit out of place, doesn't it?
Maybe. It might seem innocent at first, but we'll see how it takes on a deeper significance later on.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So you mentioned the Phoenicians were a seafaring people. Did this influence how they viewed Ashtaroth?
Absolutely. They relied heavily on fishing, and many of their cities were coastal.
Right, makes sense. So she was probably important to them in that aspect of their lives too.
They saw her as a queen of the sea, a guiding star for sailors, a protector of their livelihood.
So she was a goddess of the land and the sea. It's almost like she was woven into every aspect of their lives.
It's true. And here's where it gets really interesting. There are even depictions of her as half woman, half fish.
Half woman, half fish. Like a mermaid.
Not exactly. It seems they were more inspired by a figure called Abraxas.
Abraxas, I've never heard of that one. Who is he?
Abraxas is a figure from Gnostic beliefs and ancient magic.
Ah, okay. So we're getting to some esoteric territory.
He embodies this complex blend of good and evil, divine and demonic.
So not your typical benevolent deity.
Right. And the fact that Ashtaroth is depicted in a similar half-fish form suggests a connection. Like she might be a feminine counterpart to Abraxas.
Yeah. So she's not just a goddess of fertility and war. She's got this darker, more mysterious side as well.
Exactly. And her influence doesn't stop there. She was also worshipped in Jordan.
So she jumps from Egypt and Babylonia to the Phoenicians and now Jordan. Her reach is incredible.
She went by different names there. Atira Ara or Atret.
And did her role change in Jordan?
In a way, yes. In Jordan, her name, Atret, connects to the modern Arabic word for group or clan.
Oh, that's fascinating. So is there a link between her name and how she was perceived there?
They saw her as a mother goddess protecting the group. Her spirit was believed to manifest in the form of a fish or a dove.
Wait a minute, a fish or a dove? Those were symbols we talked about earlier.
You got it. Those symbols keep popping up. It's like they're pieces of a puzzle, and we're slowly starting to see the bigger picture.
I love it when those connections start to click into place.
Mm.
So we've got this goddess who represents life and death, war and peace, and she's worshipped across these different cultures in these incredibly diverse ways. What else can you tell us about how she was worshipped?
Well, let's talk about the rituals and practices associated with her. This is where things get a bit unconventional.
Oh, unconventional how? I'm all ears.
We have these accounts from a historian named Lucius Apuleius, and he describes some pretty shocking things going on in Ashtaroth's temples.
Okay, like
Yeah.
what? Give us the juicy details.
He mentions male priests who would castrate themselves, dress as women, and engage in rituals possibly involving sacred sex.
Whoa, hold on. Castrate themselves, dress as women. This is getting pretty wild.
It was a completely different world back then with very different beliefs and practices.
It definitely challenges our modern sensibilities.
Sure.
But I guess that's why we're so fascinated by these ancient stories. They offer a glimpse into a world that was so different from our own.
Exactly, and they make us question our own assumptions about religion and spirituality.
So these priests, they dedicated themselves to Ashtaroth, completely even changed their gender identity. That's intense.
It seems that way. And these priests are believed to be the same group referred to as the Kaddish in the Bible.
The Kaddish. I've heard that term before, but I don't really know what it means.
It's a term that has been debated over time. Essentially, they were individuals associated with temple rituals. But Apuleius' account gives us a more vivid picture of their practices and their devotion to Ashtaroth.
It's amazing how these ancient texts can provide such rich details about a world that's long gone.
It really is like opening a window into the past.
So castration, cross-dressing. What else did Apuleius describe? I'm on the edge of my seat here.
He talked about processions where they would carry a statue of Ashtaroth. The priests would wear purple robes and engage in frenzied dancing. They'd even mutilate themselves as a display of devotion.
Self-mutilation. Wow, that's taking devotion to a whole other level. Why would they do that?
It was seen as a way of offering their blood to Ashtaroth, who, as you recall, had a strong connection to both blood and death.
Right, that duality again. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is, but it highlights the complexity of Ashtaroth, a character, and how she embodied both creation and destruction, life and death.
So we have this goddess who represents life and death, war and peace worshipped in these incredibly diverse ways. It's a fascinating story. But wait a minute. Didn't Ashtaroth also play a role in the history of the Israelites?
She did, and that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm ready for the next chapter.
You see, the Israelites were supposed to be monotheistic, worshiping only one god. But their history is full of internal struggles, and Ashtaroth's influence was a major factor.
Hold on, I thought they were all about worshiping Yahweh, the one true God.
They were, but they kept getting drawn back to Ashtaroth. It's like they were constantly battling between these two belief systems.
So even though they had this strict monotheistic faith, they still couldn't resist the allure of Ashtaroth.
It seems that way. And it's a reminder that even with the strongest beliefs, those older, more primal urges can still creep in.
Okay, this is where I feel like things are going to get really interesting.
You see, despite their monotheistic beliefs, the Israelites kept getting pulled back to the worship of Ashtaroth and Baal.
Like they couldn't quite shake those older beliefs.
Exactly, and it often happened after the death of a prophet. You know, someone who had been steering them away from those practices.
So it's like they were constantly being pulled between those two different belief systems.
It was this real internal struggle for them, a tug of war between their faith in the one true God and these older, more primal beliefs.
Wow, I can see how that would create a lot of inner turmoil. How did that struggle actually manifest? Like, did they actually do anything?
Oh, yeah. They'd set up these Asherah poles.
Asherah poles, what are those?
Basically, trees that symbolized Ashtaroth. And get this, they'd put these poles right next to the altar of God.
No way. So they were trying to, like, merge those two belief systems.
Yeah.
To have it both ways.
Yeah, it does seem that way. But the Bible very clearly forbids this practice, like totally condemns it.
Really? Where does it say that?
There are passages in Deuteronomy and Jeremiah that call it an abomination.
Wow. So they were going against their own religious teachings.
It seems so, but I guess you have to understand the power of these older beliefs.
Yeah, I can see how those ancient traditions would be deeply ingrained in their culture.
Exactly. They offered this sense of connection to nature, to the cycles of life and death. Plus, you have to remember that Ashtaroth was a powerful goddess. She could both protect and destroy.
So they were drawn to that raw power that Ashtaroth embodied.
And the crazy thing is that we still see remnants of those tree-worshipping rituals in some cultures today.
Oh, like what?
Well, think about the Christmas tree, for example.
Wow, you're right. I never thought about it like that before. It's not just a random tradition. It echoes that ancient practice of decorating trees for deities.
And that shows you how deeply ingrained these symbols are, even in our modern celebrations.
Amazing. So we've got Christmas trees, Asherah poles. What other connections do we see between Ashtaroth and the Israelites?
Well, for one thing, the title Asherah was sometimes used for Ashtaroth herself.
Really? I thought Asherah was a separate goddess.
It can be confusing because the term is used in different ways. Sometimes it refers to the goddess and sometimes it refers to the symbol, the pole.
Okay, so the title Asherah could be applied to both.
Yeah. We see examples of that in Chronicles and Kings. And then there's another interesting practice mentioned in Kings. They had these tents set up for sacred prostitution near the altar of God to appease Ashtaroth.
Whoa. Sacred prostitution. That's pretty intense.
It was part of their ritual practices. And it really highlights how they were trying to integrate Ashtaroth into their religious life, even though it went against their monotheistic beliefs.
So even though they were supposed to be worshiping only one god, they were still drawn to these other deities and practices.
It was a constant struggle for them to stay true to their faith.
So besides the Asherah poles and the sacred prostitution, what other evidence do we have that they were worshiping Ashtaroth?
Well, they were drawn to the sun and moon, symbols of Baal and Ashtaroth, as we see in Kings and Jeremiah. And get this, they even worshiped the bronze serpent created by Moses.
Wait a minute, the bronze serpent, the one from the Bible?
That's right, the one Moses made to heal the people who were bitten by snakes.
I remember that story. But why would they worship it?
It seems they started to view it as more than just a symbol of God's power. They attributed magical properties to it, like it was an idol.
So they kind of twisted its meaning and turned it into something that resembled pagan worship.
Exactly. It's a prime example of how those older beliefs kept resurfacing, even when they were trying so hard to follow the teachings of their prophets.
So what happened to the bronze serpent?
Well, King Hezekiah eventually had it destroyed because people were burning incense to it.
Wow, that shows just how deeply rooted those beliefs were. It's amazing how, even with the strongest faith, those old ways of thinking can be hard to break.
Absolutely. And when you look at the Old Testament, you really see how widespread Ashtaroth's influence was. During the time of the prophet Elijah, there were 450 priests of Baal and 400 priests of Ashtaroth.
400 priests of Ashtaroth, that's a lot of people worshiping her. It must have been incredibly challenging for Elijah to steer people back to the one true God.
It was a real battle, and when you read the story of Elijah, you see how torn the Israelites were. They were constantly vacillating between those two different belief systems.
Sounds like they were stuck in this spiritual tug of war, pulled between the teachings of their prophets and the allure of these ancient gods and goddesses.
And all that back and forth, all that worship of Baal and Ashtaroth, it created this sense of confusion. It really hindered their ability to fully embrace their own monotheistic faith.
It's a powerful reminder of how straying from one's beliefs can lead to problems and how those ancient traditions can really have a strong hold on us.
And speaking of those ancient traditions, there's this really fascinating detail that highlights just how intertwined these beliefs were. It turns out that Moses, the prophet who led the Israelites out of slavery, was sometimes referred to as the Horned in ancient translations of the Old Testament.
Wait, the horned Moses, what do you mean?
Early translators like St. Jerome and Aquila of Sinope use the term horned when referring to Moses. And this even led to artistic depictions of Moses with horns, like Michelangelo's famous statue.
Wow, I've seen that statue a million times and never even realized.
It's one of those details that can easily slip by unnoticed. But there's a book, The Horned Moses, by Ruth Mellenkopf, that argues horned wasn't a mistranslation. It was a common way of describing someone with power and authority.
So they were unconsciously projecting the image of the horned God onto Moses, even though he was supposed to be the prophet of the one true God.
It's a possibility, and it raises all sorts of questions about how deeply those ancient beliefs seeped into their understanding of their own faith.
So even Moses, their most revered prophet, couldn't fully escape the influence of Ashtaroth and the horned God.
It's a really thought-provoking idea. And it's something you can actually explore visually. If you compare depictions of the horned Moses with statues of the horned god from other cultures, you'll see some pretty striking similarities.
Whoa, I'm definitely going to be doing some image searching after this deep dive. So where do we go from here? We've covered Ashtaroth's origins, her symbols, her influence on the Phoenicians, and even the Israelites. What's the key takeaway for our listeners?
I think the main takeaway is that Ashtaroth's story takes us on a journey through these ancient belief systems,
Yeah.
where the lines between gods and demons were often blurred, and the power of symbols and rituals was undeniable.
It's a reminder that those ancient ways of thinking persisted even as new religions emerged, and that those older beliefs could often clash with or even infiltrate the newer ones.
And more than that, Ashtaroth's story raises some important questions about us, about the human experience. Given that her symbols appear throughout history and even in some modern practices, what does this tell us about the power of ancient beliefs and our need to connect with something bigger than ourselves?
That's such a great question. It makes me wonder if we're ever really free from those ancient ways of seeing the world, even if we don't consciously believe in those gods and goddesses anymore. Their symbols and stories still seem to resonate with us on some level.
I think you're right. Our views on power, femininity, and even nature have roots in those ancient systems.
So Ashtaroth's story isn't just about her. It's about us. It's about understanding the forces that shaped our world and that continue to shape us today.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to engage with these stories, to question our assumptions, and to be open to the possibility that there's always more to learn, more connections to uncover.
I couldn't agree more. This has been an incredible journey, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface of Ashtaroth's story.
There's always more to discover, and I hope our listeners will continue to explore this fascinating world of ancient mythology and religion.
I'm sure they will. It's a world full of surprises and insights. So until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.
It really has been quite a journey, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing how these ancient stories can still be so relevant to us today.
You know, it's true. We started with Ashtaroth back in ancient Egypt and Babylonia.
Then we moved on to the Phoenicians.
Right. And we even looked at her impact on the Israelites.
And throughout it all, we kept seeing those recurring symbols.
The owl, the dove, the crescent moon.
Even the horned god himself, popping up in the most unexpected places.
And sometimes those symbols even show up in modern times.
It really is like putting together this massive puzzle.
Except the pieces are spread out all over time and across different cultures.
It's a puzzle that tells a bigger story, about human beliefs and desires.
About our connection to the divine, to the natural world, and to each other.
It makes you wonder if these are really just stories.
Or if they reflect something much deeper within us.
I think you're onto something there. The way we view power and femininity,
Even our understanding of nature.
they all seem to have roots in these ancient belief systems.
Ashtaroth's story isn't just about her, though.
No, it's about us too,
It's about understanding the forces that shape the world we live in.
and how they continue to influence us even today.
That's why it's so important to keep exploring these stories.
To question what we think we know.
And to be open to new perspectives and connections.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to wrap up this deep dive.
We've only just scratched the surface of Ashtaroth's story today.
But I hope our listeners got a sense of her complexity and power.
And if you're interested in learning more,
Be sure to check out the sources we've mentioned.
keep exploring the fascinating world of ancient mythology and religion.
It's a journey that will keep you on the edge of your seat.
Until next time, keep asking those tough questions. Keep exploring.
And keep diving deep.